Maxwell got mad and stormed out after I demonstrated my newest creative teaching aid, Professor Moisterious, following a shower. Turns out he was furious because his potential affair partner rejected him at lunch, and he'd been cheating on me all along. Hey Reddit, I'm usually just lurking on Instagram, so this is my first venture here. I never imagined I'd be posting because Maxwell, 34M, and I, 29F, had what I thought was an incredible marriage. We've had our occasional rough patches like any couple, but honestly, I believed we were living a fairy tale. Our wedding in April 2021 had us both sobbing with happiness. Since then, everything seemed to be flowing perfectly, or so I thought. This afternoon, we returned home after attending a lunch with our recently engaged friends, Theodore. Everyone calls him Theo, and Penelope. The outing was pleasant, but unremarkable. Just friends catching up over some absolutely delicious fusion pasta. Once back at our cottage, which I'm currently pacing around in my old teaching sweats while eating cold leftovers because it's too chilly for ice cream, Maxwell showered first while I organized the takeout containers and cleared space in our overcrowded fridge. After he finished, I took my turn, letting the hot water wash away the tension I hadn't even realized I was carrying. When I stepped out, I applied my favorite lotion, accidentally squeezing too much onto my palm. After moisturizing my face, I still had a generous dollop left on my finger. Being the creative writing teacher that I am, I did what comes naturally. I transformed my thumb into a character with a tiny smiley face and spiky hair. I named him Professor Moisterious, complete with a backstory about his adventures teaching hydration 101 to dry skin cells. I bounced out of the bathroom, genuinely excited to share my silly creation. Check it out. It's Professor Moisterious, ready to enlighten us about proper skincare techniques, I announced, already planning how I could use this character in my classroom to engage my reluctant writers. Maxwell just stared at my thumb with a completely blank expression, then looked at me with what I now recognize was thinly veiled contempt. Undeterred, I continued my impromptu performance, giving the professor a slightly British accent as he lectured about the importance of daily moisturizing routines and sprinkled in references to inside jokes from our college days. I was mid-explanation about how Professor Moisterious would make a perfect addition to my Characters Come Alive teaching series when Maxwell abruptly stood up, grabbed his keys, and walked toward the door. I was completely oblivious to the significance of the moment. I just smiled and playfully asked, "Where are you heading, babe?" Professor Moisterious wasn't finished with his lecture. He didn't even turn around. His truck was still packed from our weekend trip to his parents' lake house, so he had plenty of clothes and essentials. The reality that he was actually leaving didn't register until I heard his truck engine roar to life and watched him drive away, leaving me standing there with a lotion character still drying on my thumb. I feel utterly ridiculous now. My MFA in creative writing and years of developing imaginative teaching techniques suddenly seemed childish and embarrassing. I've texted him multiple times, but all I've received is a terse message saying he's thinking about things and that he's staying at his brother Wesley's place. I've been sending messages nonstop, varying between concerned, apologetic, and increasingly panicked, but he hasn't read any of them. He typically goes to bed around 9 p.m., banker's hours and all, so I doubt I'll hear anything until tomorrow. Wesley isn't responding either, which is unusual since we've always been close. My phone sits on the nightstand while I alternate between pacing and staring at the door, the reality of the situation still not fully sinking in. I stood there for nearly 15 minutes after he left, my mind unable to process that my husband had just walked out over a Lotion character. Maxwell and I have been together since our final year of college, and I've always been the goofy, creative one in our relationship. I constantly develop characters and silly voices. It's part of who I am and how I teach. I feel utterly foolish for continuing with Professor Moisterius when he clearly wasn't amused, instead of recognizing his mood and adjusting accordingly. But simultaneously, I'm completely baffled. Even during our worst arguments, he's never reacted this dramatically. Usually, we might be a bit distant or take a break from intimacy for a few days. But storming out? That's entirely new territory. Sorry for the overshare, but my thoughts are all over the place right now. While I believe in giving him space to process whatever's happening, I can't deny how deeply this hurts. The sudden abandonment feels like a punch to the stomach, and the terrifying specter of divorce is hovering in the background, making me nauseous. I can't even bear thinking about the implications. Was creating Professor Moisterius truly as catastrophic as it seems? Does anyone have suggestions for convincing him to come home so we can actually talk about what's happening? Thanks for listening, Reddit. This is all so overwhelming. Also, any recommendations for uplifting subreddits would be greatly appreciated. I need all the distraction I can get right now. First update. Hey Reddit, checking in again. I posted earlier about Maxwell walking out after I shared my Professor Moisterius character. Following your collective advice, I've maintained my distance and given him space. Your comments really forced me to examine how much of our relationship was genuine versus how much I'd romanticized. Though I still believe we were genuinely happy before this incident, I'm beginning to question many aspects of our marriage that I previously overlooked. You were partially right in your assessments. Those who suggested the Lotion character was merely a trigger rather than the cause weren't entirely wrong. And those who suspected something happened during our lunch with Theo and Penelope, you were absolutely spot on. Maxwell returned yesterday evening. He apologized for his abrupt departure and said he was ready to talk things through. Despite my better judgment, I agreed. I tried maintaining some emotional distance, but the truth is, I've been missing him terribly. Despite everything, he's still my husband, and the rational part of my brain hadn't caught up with the emotional turmoil yet. He explained the following. During our lunch with Theo, 35M, and Penelope, 32F, we weren't always seated together as a group. The restaurant was a high-end fusion buffet with multiple food stations, so we frequently split up to explore different options. Apparently, during one of these separations, or possibly before we left, I was engrossed in conversation with Theo about his new sports medicine practice while waiting for them to return to the car. Maxwell and Penelope found themselves alone. According to him, Penelope confessed that when Theo proposed, she experienced a revelation. She realized she was actually in love with Maxwell. Despite accepting Theo's proposal, she organized this lunch outing as an attempt to resolve her feelings. Instead, she impulsively asked Maxwell to leave me and start a new life with her. Penelope is undeniably stunning, tall, perfectly styled blonde hair, piercing blue eyes, and the polished appearance of someone who professionally plans luxury events. Next to her designer wardrobe and flawless makeup, I felt particularly self-conscious in my comfortable teaching clothes and minimal makeup. Maxwell claims he politely declined her proposition and wished her well in her engagement, but admitted her confession had been occupying his thoughts. We've all known each other since college, with complex intertwined histories and inside jokes I'm only now seeing in a different light. Then came my Professor Moisterius demonstration. I emerged from the bathroom with damp hair, wrapped in a towel, wearing my oldest, most comfortable clothes, giggling about my Lotion character, and launching into an impromptu performance. According to Maxwell, this moment crystallized a contrast in his mind between my childish creativity and Penelope's sophisticated allure. He suddenly questioned our entire relationship and fled to his brother's house to clear his head. Now, Penelope is undeniably striking, which infuriates me to admit because I'm absolutely livid with her. She has that polished event planner aesthetic, perfectly highlighted blonde hair, calculating blue eyes, and the kind of slim figure that looks effortlessly perfect in designer clothes. She resembles a more polished Emma Watson. I, on the other hand, am the complete opposite with my curly brown hair, comfortable teacher wardrobe, and perpetually ink-stained fingers from grading papers. Maxwell claims he graciously declined her proposition and wished her well, but confessed she'd been lingering in his thoughts. We've all known each other since our university days, sharing countless memories and inside jokes that now feel tainted by this revelation. When I presented Professor Moisterius to him that evening, something apparently snapped inside him. There I stood with my hair wrapped in a faded towel, wearing my most comfortable but least flattering clothes, giggling enthusiastically about my Lotion character creation. According to Maxwell, my childlike creativity in that moment created a stark contrast with Penelope's sophistication that made him question everything about our relationship. He abruptly developed doubts about our compatibility and fled to Wesley's house to process his feelings. Eventually, Maxwell returned, professing his renewed love and commitment to our marriage. I stood there frozen, my mind racing with questions as I struggled to process this betrayal. After a tense conversation where I extracted as many details as possible, I asked him to sleep on the couch for the night, a request he accepted without argument. That night was excruciating. I stared at the ceiling until dawn, replaying every moment of our relationship and wondering what other secrets he might be harboring. I simply cannot wrap my mind around the fact that he contemplated discarding our entire history together over what amounts to a fleeting infatuation. With each passing hour, I find it increasingly difficult to meet his gaze without feeling a wave of distrust washing over me. We attended his family's Thanksgiving gathering yesterday, smiling through painful small talk with relatives and close friends who had no idea our marriage was hanging by a thread. We spent last night in the same bed, and I can tell Maxwell believes he's weathered the storm and everything will return to normal. I can't honestly say I'm not tempted to simply forgive and forget, to preserve the life we've built together. He'll be home from the investment firm in about 6 hours, and I'm completely torn about my next steps. I have today off from school. I teach creative writing at the local high school, so I'm weighing several options. A. Reaching out to Theo and revealing Penelope's proposition. Maxwell practically begged me not to, insisting that Penelope was making a momentary lapse in judgment. B. Confronting Penelope directly about her attempt to destroy my marriage. Perhaps having a measured conversation, though that's far less appealing given how betrayed I feel. C. Contacting Wesley to inquire whether Maxwell left his house at any point during his supposed thinking time. Wesley's house is uncomfortably close to Penelope's condo, which raises additional concerns, though I doubt he would betray his brother's confidence. D. Pursuing all of these avenues simultaneously. I could really use some guidance, or even just kind words right now. I'm emotionally shattered and second-guessing everything. If I post any updates, they'll likely appear on my profile since this subreddit limits follow-up posts. And honestly, I don't want to commit to any definitive course of action yet. Legal proceedings terrify me. Just the paperwork alone makes me break out in hives. So divorce would be emotionally and practically overwhelming, though increasingly it seems unavoidable. Part of me wishes I could just erase this entire situation from existence. Thank you for listening, Reddit. Second update. Hey Reddit. First, I want to express my heartfelt gratitude for the overwhelming support and thoughtful messages you've all sent. I truly never expected such an outpouring of kindness. So many of you took time to message me privately, leading to some genuinely meaningful conversations with fellow Redditors. I'm touched beyond words by how incredibly supportive this community has been. I wish I could have personally responded to each of your comments, though I did upvote every single one. I believe my original post was removed for some reason. Several of you requested visual documentation of Professor Moisterius, but I haven't figured out how to upload images here yet. I promise to share when I figure it out. Many of you propose some fascinating theories about what was happening, and surprisingly, most of you were at least partially correct. The consensus was that I should pursue all three approaches: confront Theo, Penelope, Maxwell, and Wesley, though not necessarily in that sequence. I needed to be strategic since many of you cautioned that any of them might distort the narrative if they suspected others had been consulted. Before I dive in, yes, the complete story is absolutely bizarre and honestly somewhat disjointed. I'm piecing everything together through context clues, and I still have several unanswered questions. Additionally, everyone involved is emotionally compromised, so what I'm sharing might seem like jumbled chaos. I hope I can provide the closure many of you have been seeking. When Maxwell returned home, we had another conversation where he essentially repeated his previous account. He expressed openness to my suggestion of marriage counseling, which momentarily softened my resolve. I gave him a heartfelt hug and then busied myself with laundry, a task we typically share, but which I took on entirely as a subtle sign that I was beginning to forgive him, at least in his interpretation. While we don't have explicit boundaries regarding our phones, we know each other's passwords and access patterns. I knew he would become suspicious if he caught me browsing through his device. Instead, I arranged to meet with Theo first. Some of you expressed concern that he might alert Penelope, potentially causing everything to implode. But Theo is devoted to his orthopedic practice and fitness regimen, and I've been interested in establishing a workout routine, so I used this as a casual pretext when suggesting we meet. He readily agreed. The following morning, I met Theo at his favorite coffee shop near his practice. I carefully explained everything I knew about the situation, my composure crumbling several times during the conversation. Initially, Theo maintained a detached, clinical demeanor, attempting to identify inconsistencies in my account with several pointed, gotcha questions, his medical training apparent in his methodical approach. Eventually, though, his professional facade shattered. Penelope hadn't breathed a word to him about any of this, which was its own significant red flag. Together, we approached Penelope at her office. Following the advice of several Redditors who suggested directness, I simply announced, "I know everything," when she greeted us. She initially feigned ignorance before gradually revealing the truth. "You were all correct in your suspicions." Penelope's story about trying to resolve her feelings for Maxwell was completely fabricated. Maxwell had actually initiated the conversation with her. According to Penelope, he asked if, before finalizing her commitment to Theo, she would be interested in spending a night with him and another woman. The shocking part? Penelope admitted she had agreed. But that wasn't the complete story. Apparently, Penelope had been unfaithful to Theo for quite some time with various partners, both men and women, while Maxwell had also been cheating regularly. They had been covering for each other and occasionally meeting up themselves. At the last moment before our lunch outing, Penelope decided to decline Maxwell's proposition, claiming she wanted to be faithful to Theo now that they were engaged, conveniently ignoring her extensive history of infidelity throughout their relationship. Maxwell became furious about her withdrawal and claimed he was trapped at home. That's when I innocently presented Professor Moisterius. He snapped and stormed out. Both Theo and Penelope dissolved into a heated, tearful argument right in front of me. I apologized for interfering in their relationship and excused myself, promising to address my own marital situation separately. I located Wesley before sunset at his office downtown. He confirmed that Maxwell had indeed stopped by his house, but not until nearly 11 p.m. Since Maxwell had left our house around 8 p.m., there were 3 unaccounted hours. Wesley merely mentioned that Maxwell had arrived angry and uncommunicative. I provided minimal context about the Professor Moisterius incident, and Wesley suggested that perhaps Maxwell had simply been driving around to clear his head. This didn't align with Maxwell's typical behavior, He's never been one to use solitary driving as a coping mechanism, but at that point, I was willing to explore any possibility, given how bleak our future appeared. I returned home, ostensibly using Maxwell's phone to search for something online. In reality, I was checking whether Penelope or anyone else had contacted him. Thankfully, there were no suspicious messages. I focused on keeping him engaged throughout the evening. Remember my earlier mention of his early bedtime? That routine worked to my advantage. Once he was sound asleep, breathing heavily into his pillow, I carefully took his phone and began a more thorough investigation. After encountering numerous dead ends, I sensed I was still missing crucial information. Finally, I discovered his hidden photo folder. The revelation was explosive, shattering his entire narrative into fragments. What did I find? Dozens upon dozens of intimate photos. Not of me, unsurprisingly, and not of Penelope either. These were of a woman I'd never seen before. Let's call her Camilla, named after a manipulative childhood friend who betrayed my trust. Not the same person, just a suitable pseudonym since I don't know her actual name. She was stunningly beautiful, vibrant auburn hair, elegant curves, with the polished aesthetic of a professional. My heart felt physically broken as I traced these images to a contact in his phone. I felt physically ill discovering the extent of their affair. Maxwell had been communicating with her since February, mere days before I surprised him with an elaborate Valentine's Day celebration that had consumed my modest teacher's salary for months. I'd felt like the luckiest woman alive while planning it, completely unaware of his betrayal. I forced myself to continue reading their exchanges despite my nausea. Then I discovered a message from November 3rd, just 2 days after their most recent photo exchange. Camilla was furious. She had discovered Maxwell was married. She professed her love and sense of betrayal. I might have felt sympathy for her, except she never attempted to contact me directly despite knowing of my existence. Maxwell's brilliant solution? He proposed bringing me to a hotel to demonstrate that I was complicit in their relationship. Sound familiar? When Penelope canceled their arranged encounter, Maxwell was left scrambling. He desperately pleaded with her to reconsider. He then messaged Camilla claiming there was a temporary setback and promising to reschedule. That's when I innocently introduced Professor Mysterious, triggering his explosive departure. I still don't know where he spent those missing hours, but he eventually made his way to Wesley's house, slept off his anger, and returned home with his fabricated story about Penelope's advances. I'll spare you the emotional details, but after these discoveries, I couldn't maintain even a pretense of affection toward him. The next morning, I invited both Theo and Penelope to our house. Confronted with all three of us, Maxwell initially stammered through denials before finally confessing his preference for redheads. Penelope is actually strawberry blonde. Camilla is a vibrant auburn. According to his pathetic justification, this was the one desire I couldn't satisfy. I saw through his transparent attempts to claim that his affairs only deepened his love for me. With a decisive enough, I packed my essential belongings while he grew increasingly desperate. Despite my years of devotion to him, I recognized the relationship was irreparable. Since the cottage is technically Maxwell's property, purchased primarily with his family's money, I had no choice but to leave. I'm currently staying with Theo, who's experiencing similar emotional devastation. His engagement to Penelope had been the center of his world. We've spent hours embracing and crying together, venting our anger and hurt, simply trying to process the seismic shift in our lives. Theo attempted to lighten the atmosphere by preparing lunch. He's an impressively talented cook. I showed him my previous Reddit posts, and some of your comments actually made him laugh for the first time in days. From what we understand, Maxwell and Penelope are currently together, though I'm utterly indifferent to their situation. There's something cathartic about finally having clarity, no longer walking on emotional eggshells, as I've been doing for days. Theo and I plan to attend a yoga class tomorrow to help center ourselves and discuss our next steps. We've both taken temporary leaves from work. My students will have a substitute teacher while I sort through this chaos. I'm organizing my finances and preparing to formally begin divorce proceedings. I remain emotionally scattered. My desk at school holds at least 6 framed photos of Maxwell and me, and our wedding portrait serves as the lock screen on virtually all my devices. I know my students will immediately notice his absence from my life, and I'll need to explain that the husband I've been enthusiastically mentioning for years is now divorcing me. I'll need to inform my family, colleagues, and friends. Theo has become my emotional anchor through this ordeal, though I recognize we'll eventually need to establish separate lives, which is its own source of anxiety since he's become my primary support system. I'm facing significant challenges: finding permanent housing, managing divorce costs, navigating legal complexities, which terrify me, arranging therapy, which I clearly need. The list seems endless. I'm still processing the shocking revelation that my supposedly perfect marriage was built on deception. Documenting these experiences has been unexpectedly therapeutic. Reddit, I'm profoundly grateful for your support. Your honest feedback and encouraging words have quite literally saved me from continuing in this toxic relationship and helped Theo avoid a similar fate. This community is remarkable, and I'm touched by how many people have reached out with concern and encouragement. I'll definitely return for advice in the future, but please know I've read and appreciated every single thoughtful comment. This will be my final update for now. Thank you from both Theo and me. 2 years later, January 25, 2025. Mid-year curriculum planning time has arrived. For those unaware, check on your teacher friends. We're all drowning in paperwork. LOL. Hello again, Reddit. It's been quite some time since I last visited this account, and I'm overwhelmed by what I found. I hardly know where to begin. The continued support, kind messages, and New Year's wishes are truly heartwarming. The internet, especially this community, has been an incredible source of strength during the darkest period of my life. I've received countless messages asking for updates, checking on my well-being, and even sharing similar experiences. One woman's boyfriend actually blamed their new puppy for his disappearance. She shared a photo of the adorable, innocent little creature. It's simultaneously devastating and comforting to discover how common these heartbreaking experiences are, yet the outpouring of support from complete strangers keeps my faith in humanity intact. It's been approximately 2 years since everything unfolded, simultaneously feeling like ancient history and yesterday's news. There's so much to cover, so prepare yourselves. I should address the difficult news first. Theo and I experienced a rather unpleasant falling out. I won't delve into exhaustive details. That would require a novel-length post, but to summarize succinctly: proximity complications. As roommates, we became deeply enmeshed in each other's daily routines. Every grocery trip, work schedule, and household task was inevitably shared knowledge due to our living arrangements and division of responsibilities. Several months after the initial discovery, which I've come to call D-Day in my mind, Theo mentioned he had a dinner date planned. I was genuinely happy for him. At that point, I was still drowning in complicated divorce paperwork and emotional aftershocks, nowhere near ready to consider dating again myself. Since Theo and Penelope hadn't officially married, their separation was somewhat simpler than mine, though still painful. He went on the first date, then a second, but then the outings suddenly stopped. After a week of no further mentions, I casually asked what had happened, and he simply said his date had stopped responding to messages. About a week later, during an otherwise unremarkable evening, Theo dropped a bombshell that left me speechless. He had attempted to reconnect with Penelope. I know, it seems utterly irrational given everything that happened. He shared this confession while sobbing on our living room sofa, completely breaking down. Despite my own complicated feelings, my heart ached for him. Recovering from relationship trauma is a challenging road, I understood all too well. He explained that those recent dates had provided clarity, helping him realize his relationship with Penelope was definitively over. He described how, when they first met, Penelope presented a carefully crafted professional facade. As their relationship developed, she gradually revealed a more vibrant, free-spirited personality, the woman he genuinely fell in love with. However, when they reconnected recently, she had reverted entirely to her polished, surface-level persona, which devastated him because it felt like starting from zero again. He not only ended contact after 2 uncomfortable meetings, but blocked her across all communication platforms. This situation resonated painfully with my own experience, but I chose to offer comfort rather than judgment. Life stabilized for several months afterward. During this period, Theo, ever the dedicated orthopedic surgeon and fitness enthusiast, transformed me into someone who actually enjoyed regular exercise. Looking back at my earlier posts, it's amusing how reluctant I was about physical fitness. After this peaceful interlude, Theo announced he was beginning a new relationship with a friend of our mutual acquaintance. Again, I expressed genuine support. I remained entangled in divorce proceedings and still processing my emotional wreckage, so dating remained far from my priorities. As I mentioned earlier, our living arrangement naturally meant we were aware of each other's schedules. When Theo began leaving at 2 p.m. and returning around 8 p.m. for these dates, consistently long time frames that seemed unusual even for dinner and a movie, I couldn't help noticing the pattern. I refrained from commenting, assuming they were simply enjoying extended time together or perhaps visiting multiple venues. However, his absences on date days became increasingly pronounced. He even began asking me to handle some of his routine errands on those days, citing his lengthy absences as justification. Eventually, I met his new girlfriend, Isabel, approximately 28 years old, who was genuinely delightful and, coincidentally, also an educator. She taught elementary school, creating an immediate connection between us. Everything appeared to be progressing wonderfully. Theo and Isabel made an adorable couple. Summer was unfolding pleasantly, and I had finally completed my divorce proceedings. However, those extraordinarily long dates continued to puzzle me. Even brief coffee meetings stretched to 3 to 4 hours minimum. When I finally raised the question tactfully, Theo explained that Isabel preferred planning their outings, typically choosing locations an hour or two away, accounting for traffic. When I innocently asked where Isabel lived, wondering if they were perhaps meeting halfway, Theo responded with a surprisingly vague, "Not exactly sure." Perhaps my recent experiences had made me hypervigilant about relationship red flags, but serious concerns emerged. Considering Isabel was connected through mutual friends, she likely lived relatively nearby. After months of dating, how could Theo not know where she lived, especially when she had dined at our home multiple times? The deliberately distant meeting locations suddenly seemed suspicious. This is where I likely crossed appropriate boundaries. I searched Isabel's name on Instagram and discovered something shocking. Photos of Isabel in a wedding dress with a man named Michael from 2019. She was married. I immediately woke Theo, cringing now at my impulsivity. It was midnight, and he had surgeries scheduled beginning at 7 a.m. I burst into his room, wild-eyed, phone in hand, displaying the evidence. After my breathless explanation, Theo's initial grogginess transformed into unmistakable anger. He demanded to know why I was investigating Isabel's personal life. When I detailed the concerning patterns I'd noticed, his fury only intensified. Our discussion rapidly deteriorated into a full-blown argument. He accused me of severely overstepping boundaries, which was fair despite our naturally intertwined living situation. I countered by asking why he was angry when I was simply trying to protect him from another potentially devastating situation. The conversation devolved into a heated shouting match. Ultimately, he escalated by suggesting my actions stemmed from romantic interest in him, claiming he'd always felt our friendship had become inappropriately close, hence my stalking behavior. This accusation ignited my own anger, and I regretfully said several hurtful things I wish I could retract. I cruelly referenced his situation with Penelope and emphatically stated I wouldn't consider dating him for all the money in the world. The exchange deteriorated further with mutual name-calling until I finally had to leave the apartment. It was ugly and exhausting, leaving us both emotionally raw. Our supportive friendship disintegrated in a single explosive night. The following morning, Theo woke me before leaving for work. I expected the night's reflection might have led to an apology, but instead, he delivered another shocking revelation, one he admitted had been burdening him for some time. He had known about Isabel's marriage almost from the beginning of their relationship. He had simply chosen to ignore this fact. According to him, while her husband was a decent person, Isabel claimed she no longer felt emotionally connected to him. This explained Theo's unconcerned attitude about the excessive fuel costs for their distant rendezvous. I couldn't hide my disappointment with this revelation. I asked Theo how he would feel if Penelope's various partners had knowingly pursued a married woman, drawing a direct parallel to his situation. This comparison rekindled his anger as he demanded I stop mentioning Penelope. We engaged in another heated discussion, less explosive than the previous night, but still intense. He admitted avoiding this disclosure because he anticipated my negative reaction, dismissing my concerns as overreaching. When I emphasized how personally affected I was by infidelity and assumed he shared similar sensitivities given his experience, he bluntly rejected the comparison. He declared that living with me had become as exhausting as a full-time relationship and emphatically stated I had no authority over his dating choices. I conceded, "Fine, date whoever you want. I just thought you deserved to know you're participating in someone else's infidelity." My intention wasn't to escalate the situation further. He curtly accepted my statement and departed for work. I never intended to control Theo's relationships like some maternal figure. I simply believed he would want to know he was being positioned as the other man in a marriage. Personally, I would want someone to inform me if I were unwittingly dating a married person. My ethical standards would compel me to end such a relationship immediately. However, if Theo operated under different moral principles despite our shared betrayal experiences, that was ultimately his choice. I simply couldn't maintain close association with someone who knowingly perpetuated infidelity. Fortunately, I wasn't forced to immediately leave Theo's home. He was decent enough not to explicitly evict me and render me homeless, though our interactions became strained and distant. I lost considerable respect for him. His continued relationship with Isabel combined with his bizarre accusation that I harbored romantic feelings toward him created an increasingly uncomfortable living situation. Eventually, I gathered my belongings and relocated to a family friend's home. Despite the considerably longer commute to my school, this change ultimately proved beneficial for my emotional health. I should provide an update regarding Maxwell as well. Shortly after our divorce was finalized, he became engaged to another woman. This coincided with my relocation from Theo's apartment, a period when I reached my emotional nadir. My school district was simultaneously engulfed in controversy regarding AI-generated student work, while I navigated securing permanent housing in an unfamiliar community where I had no established connections. The profound isolation and constant melancholy became overwhelming. I attempted dating briefly, but experienced such mediocre interactions that I abandoned the effort, further reinforcing my loneliness. I wouldn't revisit that dark period for anything. Maxwell unexpectedly contacted me to share news of his engagement and other positive developments. He claimed to be pursuing personal growth and wanted to begin by offering a sincere apology. He proposed meeting locally, repeatedly emphasizing this wasn't a romantic overture, nor did he expect my forgiveness. In retrospect, I should have declined firmly, but my emotional reserves were depleted, and I felt like a hollow version of myself. Foolishly believing closure might provide healing, I agreed to meet. The encounter proceeded predictably. Initially, we exchanged pleasantries, and he delivered what appeared to be genuine apologies. Then he began probing about my current circumstances. I attempted to maintain privacy, offering vague responses about my students and general well-being. Unfortunately, I must have revealed too much vulnerability, as he quickly assessed my difficult situation. His expression transformed into a self-satisfied smirk as he launched into detailed accounts of his wonderful new life, attractive fiancée, her impressive engagement ring, and his general prosperity. He casually mentioned that his life had improved immeasurably since our separation, which had been a blessing disguised as hardship. I can't pretend these words didn't wound me deeply. Realizing our years together were merely obstacles he had overcome was heartbreaking. As he continued gloating, I eventually fabricated an excuse to leave. Unsurprisingly, I never received a wedding invitation, so much for genuine reconciliation. The entire interaction was a regrettable waste of emotional energy that only deepened my depression. Nevertheless, circumstances eventually improved when least expected. After countless days of simply enduring existence, I reluctantly agreed to one final date. My physical appearance had deteriorated significantly. I'd lost substantial weight and developed an unhealthy pallor, leaving me doubtful about making any positive impression. Yet sometimes fate intervenes magnificently. That evening I met Jackson, 29M, who has become the most wonderful presence in my life. He possesses extraordinary patience, genuine warmth, animated conversation skills, and infectious enthusiasm. Traditionally, I've been the energetic, creative personality in relationships, mistakenly believing I should seek someone more reserved to balance my expressiveness, a partner who might affectionately roll their eyes at my creative impulses. This widespread misconception leads many vibrant personalities into unfulfilling relationships. Let me offer some hard-earned wisdom. If you radiate brightness and creativity, don't pursue the distant, serious stereotype as your ideal match. Instead, find someone whose energy complements and amplifies your own. The difference is transformative. Throughout my life, I erroneously believed I wanted a serious, buttoned-up partner, but I've never felt more deeply appreciated and completely myself than with Jackson's wonderfully expressive personality. Gone are the days of being ignored during conversations, enduring one-sided exchanges, or receiving those half-hearted chuckles that reserved men offer to appear mature. Together, we create the most imaginative jokes, build extraordinary memories, and experience a relationship that feels vibrantly alive in ways I never thought possible. Our conversations explore fascinatingly profound dimensions of the most unexpected topics. I've never experienced a moment of boredom in his presence. If I continue describing Jackson, my fingers might actually break from excessive typing. But I need to cover a few more developments. As promised, this is comprehensive, so I'll proceed directly. By late 2024, my life had established a new rhythm. My relationship with Jackson was flourishing beautifully. I had finally secured my own apartment closer to my school, but hadn't returned to my previous fitness center until then. That's where I unexpectedly encountered Theo again. He didn't notice me for several days, but when he finally did, he approached immediately. With remarkable civility, he apologized sincerely, expressing genuine concern after I had essentially disappeared from his life. He acknowledged saying numerous regrettable things during our argument and extended an open invitation to rebuild our friendship whenever I felt comfortable. That was the extent of our interaction. It's 2025 now. I remain unaware whether Theo continues seeing Isabel, just as he doesn't know about my relationship with Jackson. I still observe him occasionally at the gym, but haven't properly reconnected since his apology. Perhaps I should, but truthfully, though this analogy might seem peculiar, Theo feels like a character from the original installment of a film franchise making an unexpected cameo in a sequel. It creates a strange cognitive dissonance. I've progressed into an entirely different chapter of my life with Jackson, leaving behind the painful episodes involving Maxwell, Penelope, and everything from that tumultuous period. Everything except Professor Mysterious. That is, he remains absolutely timeless. Speaking of my creative character, I eventually mustered the courage to show Jackson my rendition of Professor Mysterious. I confess I was trembling slightly with anxiety. But here's the perfect conclusion for those who appreciate happy endings. Not only did Jackson find Professor Mysterious absolutely hilarious, complete with uninhibited laughter, it has evolved into a cherished inside joke between us. We've since developed Professor Soapington, Dr. Ketchup, Captain Shaving Foam, and Sir Dust Bunny, essentially transforming any available substance into whimsical characters with distinct personalities and accents. Professor Mysterious has truly found his academic community. That essentially concludes my story. Countless other developments have occurred that I've omitted simply because they're not directly relevant to this narrative thread. 2 years encompasses remarkable life changes. Expressing these experiences through these detailed paragraphs has been remarkably therapeutic. Even if no one reads this update, articulating these events has lightened the emotional burden I've carried, if only marginally. The fundamental lesson I've gleaned from this experience, particularly as I've transitioned from my 20s, is that embracing your authentic self without apology invariably yields positive results. Circumstances evolve, life progresses, conditions inevitably improve when you allow yourself to shine. If your brightness seems excessive for your current circumstances, remember the limitation isn't your radiance. You simply need a more expansive environment. I'll never again apologize for my creative, authentic self. Epilogue. Reflecting on this journey has crystallized important truths about authenticity and self-acceptance. My creative teaching approach, once mocked by Maxwell, now flourishes in my classroom and personal life. Jackson's appreciation for my imaginative expression has validated what I always knew. Our quirks aren't flaws to be tolerated, but essential aspects of our identity to be celebrated. Somewhere in a bathroom in America, Professor Mysterious is delivering another impromptu lecture on hydration, and this time, he's being met with the laughter and appreciation he deserves.